Okay, wrapping up the U-2 incident from the last recording. Basically, the incident of the Soviets shooting down a U.S. spy plane occurred about 10 days before a planned Paris summit between Khrushchev and Eisenhower. Eisenhower does admit he authorized the U-2 flights for national security reasons. We suspend further flights, but Khrushchev is very upset and demands an apology. Eisenhower refuses, and Khrushchev calls off the Paris summit. Other foreign policy challenges during the 1950s includes Iran, where the CIA is going to help engineer a coup to overthrow the prime minister at the time and install the Shah that was friendly to westernization and giving us their oil as the dictator. Nationalistic leaders within Iran wanted foreign oil holdings turned over to the Iranian government, which is not going to make the U.S. happy. And in 1979, of course, the Iranian Revolution is going to overthrow the Shah and exact, quote unquote, revenge against the U.S. by taking American hostages from our embassy and holding them there for 444 days. If you would like more information on this topic, please enjoy the movie Argo starring Ben Affleck. All right, we also have a crisis in the Suez Canal. Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, becomes president of Egypt. He is an Arabian nationalist. He opposed the existence of Israel, which the U.S. is going to support in 1948 when it is created. It's going to give funding for the Aswan Dam on the Upper Nile for irrigation and power. If you want, there's a great National Geographic special on taking the entire temple of Ramses II, known as Abu Simbel, apart. The U.S. helps with this, and then they reconstruct it on a man-made mountain so that when we build the Aswan Dam and Lake Nasser, we don't destroy that beautiful piece of ancient Egyptian architecture. Nasser is going to be fantastic at playing the US and Russia off against each other. So if Nasser wants money for a project, he's going to go to the US. If the US doesn't want to give it to him, then he's just going to say, hey, I'm going to go talk to my friends over in Russia. And then the US will capitulate and give him some money. He does the same thing with Russia, so he gets a lot of money from both sides. Nasser is going to seize and nationalize the Suez Canal, which was mainly owned by British and French stockholders. In 1956, Israel is going to be convinced by the France and Great Britain to go ahead and attack Egypt in order to try to get the canal back. Doesn't go so well. It's a really quick little war. And then it kind of goes back and forth. Nasser contains the Suez Canal. He holds on to it. And the U.S. is actually going to get in trouble with France and Britain for siding with Egypt, who is not in NATO as of yet. So that is pretty much most of that. And then we're going to move on to Cuba. So please, for synthesis, take some time and watch Obama's speech about Cuba that he just gave this week, being in Havana, because this goes back to a lot of the things we're going to talk about dealing with the Cold War. So in 1959, Fidel Castro is a Cuban. He is going to take control of Cuba. Batista is the oppressive leader since 1951. So you're basically replacing a bad leader with a possibly even worse leader, depending on how you feel about Castro. Castro visits the U.S., but Eisenhower kind of refuses to see him because Eisenhower doesn't want to be seen talking to a communist. So Nixon is actually going to meet with him. What makes Castro and the U.S. start to butt heads, is Castro is going to eventually confiscate all American-owned property within Cuba. Now that's going to anger our business leaders who have been there on their sugar plantations since prior to the Spanish-American War. In September of 1959, Khrushchev is going to decide, hey, Cuba, we're going to help you out. And that's going to ruin the U.S. relationships with Cuba when Castro seeks the Soviet Union as an ally. So the United States is going to be plotting against Cuba. During Eisenhower's presidency, the CIA is going to draft a beautiful plan known as the Bay of Pigs, which we will talk about here in a little bit later. It does not go so well. And actually, in a speech in July of 1960, Khrushchev is going to publicly extend the Soviet nuclear umbrella to Cuba and state that the Monroe Doctrine was dead and that he would shower missiles on the United States if they decided to attack Cuba. All right, September 1960, the CIA, good old CIA, is going to open talks with the mafia, try to arrange a hit on Castro. Well done. That doesn't go well. U.S. is going to break diplomatic relations in January of 1961, and Castro is going to encourage revolutions in other parts of Latin America. Excuse me. In Guantanamo, the CIA is going to help overthrow the president because he begins also accepting arms or weapons from the USSR. And Nixon is going to have to call off an eight-country goodwill tour of Latin America after he is met with hostility in Venezuela and Peru in 1958. So our good neighbor policy, our synthesis for Latin America is pretty much dead at this point. We are not welcomed in Latin America, and they are starting to turn to the Soviets for help. So let's look at Eisenhower's presidency a little bit and go ahead and give him his report card. Not too totally bad. We avoid World War III, so that's always a good thing. There's a term called a lame duck presidency, and that's usually within a president's last 2 years, especially when we have a divided government and the Congress is of one party. This happened to be the Democrats for the last 6 years that Eisenhower has been in office, and the president, of course, is a Republican. So Eisenhower is going to veto 169 congressional bills sent to his desk for signature, and he's only overridden twice. So his record is far superior to that of Truman's. We're going to see public works projects revitalized in certain parts of the country. The St. Lawrence Waterway, constructed with Canada, is going to make the Great Lakes region very popular. Economically, of course, we have the Federal Highway Project we've already mentioned. Eisenhower's greatest failing to some historians are going to be he didn't do enough for the civil rights movement. Also, the idea of massive retaliation, nuclear diplomacy to end the Korean War. Yet, you could argue that Ike exercised a lot of restraint in military affairs, despite him being a general. Also, the New Deal and Fair Deal were expanded in numerous ways and continued to be embedded into America's life. So, overall, Eisenhower is actually a pretty decent president. So, youth culture. Youth culture. So during this 1950s, this is the time where we start to get the term the teenager. So teenagers are going to play a new role in music and movies, and actually to the point where Hollywood is going to start to cater to teenagers, and we're going to see that in movies like Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean. TV shows, again, I mentioned earlier that cult of domesticity reemerging, and we see that in TV shows like Leave It to Beaver. I've put a clip of Leave It to Beaver on there. I highly suggest you watch it. It's fairly short, and we'll try to get to a few of them in class. During the 1950s, we see the emergence of a new type of music. So the 40s and 30s were swing, 20s and 30s were jazz. We are now full on into rock and roll. So we've mixed the blues and the jazz. And a lot of people say this starts in Tupelo, Mississippi with Elvis Presley. That is him on the bottom right, if you have never seen a picture of Elvis Presley. And that is his famous song, Jailhouse Rock or Hound Dog. I can't remember which one I put in there. Okay, and we're going to start in the 1950s with a counterculture movement known as the Beat Generation, also known as the Beatniks. And this is really going to be started by an author named Jack Kerouac, and his famous work is called Howl. It is not something we can read in school, but it is a fascinating piece of literature if you do want to check it out on your own time. But this is the anti-establishment movement. So it does not start in the 1960s with the hippies, as you've probably been told. It actually starts in the 1950s with the beatnik generation. And how you knew they were beatniks? They wore all black. Black pants, black clothing, black berets were extremely popular, lots of smoking, house parties, listening to different kinds of music, sharing of partners, things like that. So it was kind of the precursor to the counterculture hippie movement, but it does start in the 1950s, and as I said, it started with new authors and writers. So Jack Kerouac is the famous one because I believe he even termed the coin the Beat Generation. All right, so religion in the middle class. Earlier, I believe on slide, let's go back. Billy Graham, a very famous preacher. We're going to see kind of a mini resurgence of religion again in the middle class. But the next thing I want to show you is Levittown. So here's Levittown in 1957. What do you notice? You notice homes, small middle class homes. If you drive through the Midwest in Indiana, Ohio, and the old neighborhoods, you will see these types of homes still around today. This was a suburban population boom. They're known as tract houses. So with Levittown and the Federal Housing Administration, they offered very cheap loans to first-time home buyers. And Levittown in New York was basically this huge area of where families are going to move to. Suburban America, everybody's going to have the car, the dog, and the 2.2 kids. So it really kind of changes everything. And these homes are going to build up very, very, very quickly. They're all going to look exactly alike. There is very little change to the style of the homes. And like I said, you can kind of see them still today, depending on the neighborhoods that you drive through. Okay, fast food and shopping malls. So we love shopping. We love fast food. America does, at least. And we're going to see McDonald's. So McDonald's was a little food stand that was bought and transformed into this Goliath of fast food. It also shows globalization because you can go anywhere and see McDonald's, even here in Turkey. Shopping malls are going to become a new thing as well. Going back to religion and Billy Graham, sorry, I just saw something in my notes I wanted to make sure I passed on to you. Being religious in the 1950s was considered basically being American as well. And part of that is because of the Red Scare. And this is where we get the phrase "under God" added to the Pledge of Allegiance. Another famous beat poet, I know I'm going back, but I just found another section of my notes. So another famous beat, Allen Ginsberg. So Allen Ginsberg, look up him as well. Rejected conformity. They are going to be drug users at the time, and basically they're going to come back in the 60s. Okay, So let's keep going. All right, in urban immigrants, we are going to see a new wave of immigration hit during the 1950s and 60s. This is primarily going to be from kind of all over Europe, especially after World War II. We're going to see huge German and Jewish populations migrate to the United States. Italian, Chinese immigrants escaping the Cultural Revolution, Cultural Revolution in China. Also, after the Korean War, we're going to see a huge surge of immigrants. They're going to move to the cities, and this is another propelling factor of white flight out to the suburbs.